Greetings, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with two of the nation's most experienced and respected political experts. The co-director of USC Center for the Political Future, Robert Shrum, and Michael Murphy. Bob has over 40 years of experience working in Democratic politics, beginning as a speechwriter to New York Mayor John Lindsay in 1970. He was a speechwriter for Senator George McGovern and the speechwriter and press secretary to Senator Edward Kennedy from 1980 to 1984. He also served as the senior advisor to the Gore-Lieberman campaign in 2000 and to Kerry Edwards' campaign in 2004. He has written a wonderful book about his career called No Excuses, Concessions of a Serial Campaigner. Mike is one of the Republican Party's most successful political consultants. He's led more than 20 statewide campaigns, including gubernatorial races for Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Christine Todd Whitman. He's widely known for his work in the 2000 GOP primaries as senior strategist for Senator John McCain. Both Bob and Mike are sought after for their political insights and knowledge, and our timing could not be better to talk with them today about how they see the world of politics, how we might be able to change the polarization that we're seeing in our country, and the role of their fabulous center here at USC in education of future leaders. So, on with the show. I just read your bios for everyone watching, and I suspect that most people living under the recent political climate would think that you can't possibly like each other. But I know that you've been professional adversaries and personal friends for decades. You ran presidential campaigns against each other, and that's very serious politics. And you still got together for dinner and drinks. I think you are doing and living what most of us want to be able to do and think that our leaders should be able to do. So let's talk a bit about that. Can you share with us some of those early experiences when you were actually competing with each other?
Well, I've thought about this some, and the truth is that we've competed against each other in Senate races. In 2000, Mike was with McCain, I was with Al Gore, and I never personalized it. I mean, first of all, Mike's a conservative. He has a different set of beliefs than I do. I'm a center-left Democrat, and so we don't agree on everything. In fact, we don't agree on all that much. But we do agree that politics ought to be civil, that we ought to have some respect for each other and some respect for the truth. And quite frankly, that you can be opponents without being enemies. That if you lose the game, you don't need to burn down the stadium.
Yeah, we've both been around politics long enough to remember that, you know, it is not I'm right, you're evil. Because when you have a politics like that, anything goes. Well, they're evil. We can lock them up, cheat, lie, steal. And then you destroy the whole purpose of politics, which is to solve political things where you disagree, you know, without gunfire. And so even though Bob and I compete ferociously and we used to kind of argue on television quite a bit, we were living parallel universes as campaign consultants, and we knew there'd always be another campaign. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. The key is, you know, go back to the fight honorably because the cause is important, but try to protect the political institutions you operate within. And a little of that is lost now, so we're trying to rekindle it at the Center for the Political Future here at USC.
You know, it's also the case that this used to be true at the highest levels of power, at least often true at the highest levels of power. Mr. Conservative Ronald Reagan, as president, could do a deal with Tip O'Neill, the very progressive Speaker of the House of Representatives, to save Social Security. He did a deal with Mr. Liberal, Ted Kennedy, to reform immigration in 1986. That used to be the way it worked. Now I think that people are almost afraid to do it, that they're afraid that they're going to get primaried, that they're going to be thought to be somehow or other untrue to the cause. But I have a little hope listening to Joe Biden, who went through the primaries and didn't give an inch, saying, yes, I want to be able to work with Republicans. Yes, I want to be able to reach across the aisle. And some people said that's not only unrealistic, it's somehow or other a betrayal of basic democratic values. And he's never deviated from saying that, and gave a pretty powerful speech in Gettysburg a couple of weeks ago that laid out the case for that.
Mm. I've been at a debate before, and I was at a debate a few years ago, and before the most recent set of debates, and behind the scenes, all of the political leaders were actually talking to each other. They'd move from podium to podium, they'd shaken hands. It seemed very friendly, but I don't think it's like that now. I mean, what was it like in some of your campaigns when you were on these ferociously competing sides? Did even the aides and others still share information and talk, or was it already starting? Or when did you notice it was really starting to spread?
It's interesting. I think, Carol, what you saw at that debate, though, is instructive, because some of that still exists today, but it's all hidden because everybody's afraid of their tribe calling him a traitor. In the old days, there were about 80-ish members of Congress among the 435 between the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat. There's a lot of overlap based on regions of the country, and there were friendships. There still are. It's just now it's like an affair. They don't want to be seen. Well, what we now have is about 5 members of Congress between the two parties, between the most conservative Democrat, most liberal Republican, and it's shrinking. So that has kind of made it harder, at least out in public, to be what politicians want to be, because you got to remember the personality types of most elected officials. They were the Rotary president or head of their Boy Scout troop, or she was a leader, of the sorority or the Phi Beta Kappa society. They're all people, and they want to be loved. And so you get them all in Congress, and what they want to do is make friends and try to get some stuff done. But then they're caught in this craziness of modern politics where it's so tribal that, oh, you're suspect, you're going to get a primary. We're gonna take you out because you spend too much. Like Dianne Feinstein's in trouble now for being polite in the old school way to Lindsey Graham. Now, out in the theater of politics, among Democrats, Lindsey Graham is like Dracula, and among Republicans, Dianne Feinstein is, dangerous communist from San Francisco. Now, in real life, they both, as chairman and minority leader on the committee, have to work together a little bit, and a little of that came through at the hearings, and it's discordant because, wait a minute, shouldn't she hit Lindsey? He's evil, do anything. And so what that has done is made it, and in campaigns, to your question, the staff, there would all be restaurants where, now it's heated in October. Sometimes the staff are having affairs, and sometimes they're having a fist fight in the parking lot. You never quite know, but it's passionate, and they're acting like humans, and because everybody's trapped in this world. You go during a presidential primary year in New Hampshire or Iowa, there are a couple of restaurants you go to, and you will see the national staffs of both candidates hanging around, making bets, having arguments, because it's like the circus has come to town and all the circus people kind of know each other. So some of that is left because humans have to be humans, but the culture now punishes it in a way we didn't before, which makes it so hard for politicians to do what the word means in its origin, to practice politics with each other to achieve some things. So that's the strain. And again, we're kind of throwbacks. We're trying to see if throwbackism can catch on.
Well, let me say 2 things about that. First, let me give you an example. After the Bill Clinton healthcare proposal lost, in fact, it never even got to a vote on the floor, Ted Kennedy decided he wanted to ensure the health of all the poor kids in America. And he went to Orrin Hatch, and this was the S-CHIP program. It exists now. And he said, I got to have a Republican co-sponsor. Will you do this with me? And Hatch said, I'm not so sure that I want a big federal program. And Kennedy said, how about if we design it so the federal government finances it, sets standards, but the states administer it? And Orrin Hatch said, I can do that. And as a result of that, 8 million kids have health care today. I think it would be very hard to duplicate that right now. I think Biden, if he gets elected, is going to try to do some of that. The second thing is, in terms of the center, I don't have any illusions that we single-handedly are going to change this and reify our politics, reform them. But I think we can model and advance that cause. We can model and advance the idea that we can disagree respectfully. We can look for common ground where we can find it. And most of all, we're going to base what we do on a common set of facts. You know, Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but not their own facts. In today's universe, people can get all their own facts if they want by going only to the cable network they agree with, only following on Twitter people they agree with, only interacting on Facebook with people they agree with. So we brought Mark Short to campus for a conference, and he's Vice President Pence's chief of staff. And we brought leading Democrats, and people, believe it or not, engage in genuinely productive, insightful, and civil discussions.
Now, you really make it seem so clear that not only is COVID affecting the election in a very obvious way, by having people quarantined, there's none of this off behind the camera, seeing this, none of this humanity that can actually bind people. That's actually really hard. And of course, that's affecting us in our classrooms and everything else. Do you have any memories yourself of times when you just didn't even want to talk to each other because you just had hit a point and said, okay, that's it. I got to stay away from him for 5 minutes, or I'm not going to sit down. Or if how did you get past it? Like, where did you break bread again to come back to some sort of camaraderie?
I never had that reaction. I don't know if Mike did. Look, it's hard. I've said before that you don't go into political consulting, for example, unless you know that every 2 years your heart can be broken, and you know that you can lose a race and that you really care about a race. But you can't turn that into dislike of people on the other side, especially if you have a degree of respect for the fact that you may not agree with them, but they actually have views, they believe in the views, and they can articulate and argue the views. The most famous meal I think I've had with Mike, at least the most consequential meal, was I took him a couple of years ago to Il Compadre as we were building up the center and in West Hollywood. And I said, Mike, how would you like to be the co-director of the Center for the Political Future? And I explained what we were doing. And I didn't know what he would say. And he said, let me go home and talk to my wife. And within, a few days, we had it done. And it's been a very productive process ever since.
Yeah, it's funny. I've given up hope on Bob long ago that he'll ever make sense on policy. I want to write a sequel to his book called A Lot of Excuses. I should have been a conservative, but I know that's impossible. So I never get personally mad, even if we were on opposite sides of a campaign. Now, I will say, because it's easier, I often get mad at the other candidate. How can they try that? I growl at the TV a little bit. But then I have in my life, I've had the character building experience of like finding myself sitting next to a candidate who shall remain nameless, who I ran about $10 million of vicious negative ads against. And starts out a little cold, but by the end of it, we're having a drink, and he was very gracious, and the humanity does kind of come out. It's just interesting, but no, I don't think I've ever held any animus toward Bob for his work in politics. I disagreed with a lot of it, but I understand the world he operates in because it's identical in kind of a mirror image of the world that when I was doing campaigns I operated in. So I expected him to throw hard punches too. I would have been a little disappointed if he hadn't.
It's great. And I think for our students, it's really important. I think they really are thirsting for that example, but want to believe themselves that they can disagree and still come and find common ground. So I love that about what you do and the way you do it. But before I leave this subject, I have to know, have you become so close that you actually order the same cocktails, or you
well, let's not go crazy
same sports teams? Tell us the background here.
Well, we're both Georgetown people, so we actually have a college connection there, and we can hate Syracuse together. But we have been known to put a dent in a Mexican restaurant from time to time. But we have plenty of. We're both history nerds too, so I guess that's the point of connection as well.
Yeah, and my stepson, who has a separate friendship with Mike. I mean, it's not through me. Actually, introduced Mike to his wife. So, you can live a real, normal, decent human life and be on opposite sides of the political spectrum. It can actually be a little like it was when I was a kid, where I lived in a neighborhood in Culver City that was very mixed politically. Our next door neighbors were fierce Republicans. We'd have barbecues with them in the summer. That's what we're losing. And by the way, there is so much data now which suggests that people are segregating themselves politically, and that their friendship circles are being subjected to political litmus tests. Now, I think that's one of the most dangerous developments in the country.
Yeah.
And that's something I'd like to see the center do its best to militate against on campus.
So I want to talk about that. I think that's a perfect move, because I think this you made the intentional choice that you wanted to have bipartisan leadership at the center. And I think there's not another center like it, at least on the West Coast, and very few in the country. And it is central to the goal. So how do you even bring students around to I mean, a lot might want to do it, but they might not know how to listen so freely, how to be open to it, sometimes even how to challenge them to take the other side. You know, can you talk us a little bit through how do you model and teach what it means to be truly learning in a bipartisan way that makes things advance?
Well, I think there are two things, two kind of pillars, at least in my mind. One, and I'm going to echo something Bob said earlier, the importance of facts in an argument. Political science has done a lot of work on this, and totalitarian regimes, when they start to take over, the first thing they do is attack the idea of objective truth, of facts. Because then when they can create the truth, it becomes very easy to destroy political discourse. So, campuses tend to be more left than right. It's a little harder to be a classic conservative like I am right now, because the president is quite an outlier, and his activity is often so horrid, it takes away the ability to kind of have a fair fight, because everybody wants to talk about how bad he is. But, the country's going to vote, and maybe we're evolved beyond that. So beyond respecting the facts, the kind of cousin of that is, you got a brain, use it, develop your own opinions. Don't use politics as a fashion accessory to constantly virtue signal because you want to fit into a crowd. There is the courage to be a contrarian and have legitimate arguments, and often that means to be a conservative on some campuses, is a good thing. It's a great intellectual exercise, and it's freeing to not think, well, everybody says these three things, so I have to too to fit in. And so, I try to teach the ability to be an outlier when that's what you believe, but have arguments and facts to prosecute your case. Don't see politics as a fashion accessory.
I'd say that we do some very specific things that I hope broaden students' perspective and subject them to different sets of ideas. We have a fellows program where we bring political actors to campus. They're there for a semester. They actually teach a 2-credit course, which makes us unique among institutes of politics. And you can have a very convinced liberal Democrat taking a course from someone who's a real conservative Republican, like Mimi Walters, the former Congresswoman, who's one of our fellows now. Barbara Comstock will be next semester. You can have, we had a very conservative student that I encouraged to take a seminar with Dan Schwerin, who was Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter, and he learned an immense amount from it. Secondly, I hope with our programming that we do that, so that week after week after week, we try to expose students to different perspectives, a variety of ideas that really hone in on what's top of mind for them. And thirdly, we run these major conferences. We just finished a climate conference that had Tom Steyer being interviewed by Joe Arvai, the new director of the Wrigley Institute. We then had a panel, Mike was on it. So was Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico, and Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey, and under George W. Bush, the head of the EPA. And we focused not on whether or not climate change is real, but on how you can move this forward, how you can do something about the political obstacles. The Warsaw Conference, let me do one last thing.
Sure.
The Warsaw Conference, which will occur on November 13th, James Carville will be there, and Karl Rove will be there. And it will be a civil conversation, and people will be able to ask questions of either of them.
The other thing we do, which kind of runs through all that, is we expose students to the practical world of politics. Because often they think, well, if your uncle's not a senator, you can't be part of it. You know, they kind of assume this corruption. It's actually a very open world where hustle works. And so they can sit down with somebody who had high political office and say, how did you get into this? Well, I made myself useful on the campaign by getting there before everybody else. Really? You didn't, there wasn't some committee that came to your house? No, it's totally entrepreneurial. So we do a lot of kind of basic vocational training of how people crack into politics and how you have a political career. And I think what a lot of students are surprised to find is it's actually quite accessible if you're willing to kind of hustle and scramble and push.
So,
and then we want, I'm sorry, go ahead, Carol.
No, you go. Rather hear you.
Well, we also want to take this whole process beyond the university gates. We want the academy to have an impact in the public square. And I think our conferences, our election R&D broadcasts, which we're now doing, by the way, in partnership with the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival. So we have a whole other audience so that we can have an impact on the broader world. You know, after 2016, when we did our post-election conference, it was really quite different than one that occurred at some other famous university where people basically threw dinner rolls at each other. We actually had a real exchange of ideas, what happened, what turned this at the end, what could have made the difference. So we want to have that impact, not just on campus, which is critical to us. We have hundreds of students that we supply internships to, but we want to have that impact on the wider world. And of course, the USC poll, which became famous in 2016 for indicating that Donald Trump might win, is going now. The track goes every single day, and you can read about it in almost any major newspaper in the country.
So I'm going to come back to the poll in a minute. Another thing, one of the things that you talked about, the climate conference, which I thought was fabulous, makes me think, and as history buffs, one thing students might not know is that we have these bipartisan issues, but sometimes the entire parties shift. But of course, if you go back to the history of environmentalism, that was a Republican. It started really as part of the Republican Party. And so I think that's really interesting when these things switch and suddenly they become carried by one party and not the other. And I don't know if people understand that, but I think that helps break down some of the anger if they see that these can change. I don't know. Do you talk about that with them? How issues switch parties sometimes?
Oh yeah, parties are very dynamic. They evolve with the population. And Barbara Boxer, the former senator and member of Congress from California, is one of our fellows. And she was doing her class, and we were both zoomed in, and we talked a little about the evolution of the Republican Party since the Nixon era, where Nixon was actually quite progressive, a little troublingly so to me, but on domestic policy and how the parties evolved. Originally, how it was the Southern Republicans, of which there used to be very few, mostly kind of country club Republican members of Congress, who were civil rights moderates when the Democrats had a segregationist history there, and then came the Southern strategy and a realignment. So yeah, there's a rich history of both parties kind of evolving for a variety of reasons. And it's one of the most fun things to study in American politics. So we look, believe me, we are both capable of boring a student into like ready for dental surgery, talking about, I remember that Ashcroft primary against Nixon out of Ohio in '72. Both of our offices, when we can reopen them, are political memorabilia museums. So yeah, that's a lot of the fun.
Well, when I ask you about this, thinking about that sort of history and how it's changed, at least for me, I don't know that I ever saw coming such a broad set of stories about white supremacists and far-right political parties, and just the way things have really kind of gone off the rails right now in that conversation. Have there been other times that you've seen things like that in, at least in the last, 40 years? Or is this just really, have we moved into a very different state in the political discussion?
I think times of great change are always times of turmoil. If you look at the 1960s, the Civil Rights Revolution, there was a lot of pushback. There was a resistance. You had George Wallace run first as a Democrat in 1964, and then as an independent in 1968. He tried to run as a Democrat again in 1972. And his most famous line, I think, was in his inaugural address as governor of Alabama: segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. So when people are going through periods where settled assumptions tend to dissolve, where settled patterns of life are changed, then I think you're going to get pushback and resistance. I think when Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, which is now popular, it actually helped create the Tea Party. And people ran around with signs saying, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare." I mean, I don't know where they thought Medicare came from. Did it fall from the sky? It came from the government. So that always happens. But I have never seen a president of the United States, even though some, and Mike mentioned the Southern strategy, some like Nixon might use code words. I've never seen a president of the United States who so openly is willing to sound like he's tolerant of, say, white supremacy, or tells the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. I've never seen that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Bob, and then I'll jump
No,
in.
I'm done. Go ahead.
I would say we are in a kind of a perfect storm now. There are connections to Wallace and Trump, the populism. Wallace himself is a fascinating figure. He started as, relatively speaking, for Alabama at the time, a racial moderate. Then he swung into the segregationism at a hot level after he lost a campaign, which often motivates political change in politicians. Then later in his life, he recanted a lot. But Trump is taking kind of that same angry populism with a racial undertone, and he has taken away the guardrails that most, politicians operate under. And he's got out the kind of dark piano, and he's hit a lot of very troubling notes. The other thing that's unique to our modern era is the power of digital, communication, the internet. Because in the old days in the congressional campaign, the campaign manager would have a lockbox full of stamps. That was like an important weapon, so you had to keep it locked up. They were worth money. People sending letters, and then we got into paid television ads and all the things we do. Well, the internet, you can do stuff for free. I mean, I can tweet right now to about 120,000 people some bad joke, and it would go around the world for nothing, and I'd probably have no career in 2 hours. So that speed lets extreme messages go. And the last thing I'd say is there's a symmetry to it. On one hand, the internet and the kind of spark that Trump can provide in the subtext has been, very good for these white separatist, supremacist, crazy groups. And on the hard left, you're seeing more violence and, frankly, a lot of anti-Semitism rearing up in American politics in a way we haven't seen, with some of the protesters, the Antifa anarchists, and all that. So all these bad things tend to happen in twos, and it's definitely been let out of the cage. And the internet has become an amplifier and recruiting device. And I think one of the heavy chores for the next president is to try to push us back to normalcy on condemning widely and on a bipartisan basis, both wings of the kind of radical, destructive hate movement on the right and the left.
I think that's one of education's real jobs too. And by the way, I thank you, because I think you're creating solutions for us in that really important area. So I'm going to switch a little bit to some of the things that are happening right now in the political theater. And let's just talk about dueling town halls. Okay, that's what we had last night. What do you think? Is that the wave of the future? Was it better than trying to have a debate these days? I mean, my question is, are debates over, and what's going to come next? What do you think?
I think we'll have a debate next week because Trump desperately needs to have one. Every day that goes by that he doesn't gain is a wasted day, and he's behind by about 10.5 in the Real Clear Politics average. And if he loses by that much, he can't win an electoral victory. I don't think debates are a thing of the past. I don't think they've always been as influential as people assumed. I think the first Kennedy-Nixon debate was very influential, and Kennedy probably could not have become president without it. But you can also go into a debate and you can have a strategy that pushes people away. And that's what happened to Trump in that first debate. I would not have advised him to do the things he did. And our Daybreak poll, our USC Dornsife Daybreak poll, shows that he actually lost vote as a result of the debate, widened the Biden margin, really hurt himself in terms of his favorables, and was seen as the number of people who saw him as unfit for the presidency went over 50%. So I think debates are still consequential. They are not always decisive. We may look back on that first presidential debate this year as a defining moment in the 2020 campaign.
Yeah, debates have evolved. They're not really debates anymore. And increasingly, they're more about the media than the candidates, because there's this huge opinion industry, of which I will confess I'm part of, where every day has to be the biggest day of the campaign. Everything is breaking news. Trivia gets elevated because, like any business, they're chasing clicks and attention. Now, they do try to add good journalism to it, but that breathless need for constant conflict. So these debates have become kind of a Super Bowl deal with endless, analysis. This debate the first one was particularly weird because the president, who tactically, as Bob said, really needed something to happen in the campaign because he was losing before the debate, but his actions made it worse for him after the debate. So I think we have one more. And the question is, kind of a political observer, is, will anything be different, or is Donald Trump the atomic clock of being Donald Trump and he can't modify? If that happens, then nothing good will happen politically for the president. If he can show a new and improved Donald Trump, maybe he'll get a little last minute traction, though I wouldn't bet on that. And as far as the town halls, there's all this pearl clutching about it. And some people on the left were angry. How dare NBC give Trump TV time identical, by the way, to the time they gave Biden a week ago. It turned out just fine. Savannah Guthrie did a great job. The fact checking has been brutal on the president. And Joe Biden did a very good job in his town hall. And interestingly, got higher ratings than Donald Trump, which is probably the worst bit of news the president has heard in 4 years. And I'm sure he's very upset about that, because that seems to be his guiding compass in so many things. So I think most people are glad this is going to be over soon. But we may end on one more very unconventional and I don't know what to say, entertaining debate.
Well, the other political right now, of course, is the Supreme Court hearings. That's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what do you think about the Senate moving forward? And maybe even more interesting, would the Democrats have done the same thing if they held the Senate and the White House? What do you think?
I'm realist enough to think Democrats would have done the same thing. The difference, of course, is that Republicans, when they stopped Merrick Garland in 2016, said, we can't approve any Supreme Court justice in an election year. And Lindsey Graham went so far as to say, use my quotes against me if I ever violate this. We can never do this again. We can never do this. It's wrong. So I think the Republicans bear a kind of special burden here, but Democrats would have done it. And the Republicans, I think, have the votes almost certainly to confirm Judge Barrett. I don't know if they'll get it done before the election. They're trying to. And I think part of that is that if they lose the presidential election and the Republicans lose control of the Senate, there will be much more resistance among the public to the idea that they're appointing a Supreme Court justice. Mike probably likes the justice or Judge Barrett substantively. I don't particularly like her substantively, but I do think there's a really important process question here.
Yeah, I think the Democrats would do exactly the same thing, but they wouldn't pay the hypocrisy tax the Republicans should after the Mary Garlick thing, where apparently the most important thing in the world was not doing it during an election year. And now, everything is backwards and we have to do it now. I mean, she's not my favorite idea of a conservative justice, but I'm not that troubled by the appointment. It does trouble me. I look at it like this: in regular tough politics, it is doable. Democrats would do the same thing. But I think my beloved Republican Party has a bit of an institutional debt to pay the country back for the damage done for 4 years under Donald Trump. So the idea of kind of a banana republic move to shove a justice through in the midnight hours before you are quite potentially thrown out of the majority in the Senate adds yet another dose of institution smashing that I think the Republican Party right now has a kind of a standard of contrition to hold that maybe not such a good idea. I mean, Trump could have made a move with a more moderate conservative and maybe not smash the plates as much as he's doing with this, and that would have made me happier. But then I'm a crank about this whole process. I think it's a sad story for the institution of the Senate, how for the last 25 years we've been on a race to try to politicize these appointments as much as possible. First, we had the borking, where the Democrats made it a negative political campaign. Then the arms race escalated. Harry Reid got rid of the 60% for non-Supreme judges. McConnell said, okay, I'll show you how that's done. Did it for Supreme Court justices. And now there's talk of packing the court. So, we're going to need a bigger building. I think the whole trend is a sign of weakness in our politics. And so I wish the Republicans would help turn it by not being as craven about how they're doing this.
I know people would love to know more about the poll because, of course, a lot of people watching it know that you do the poll, and you were just saying you do it every day now. So that's something very interesting to people. So what does today tell us?
I think today was about 11.2, something like that. I'd have to look it up. But it's been very steady. I mean, it's been between 10.5, which it may be tomorrow, I think, between 10.5 and about 12.5 over the last few weeks. And as Mike suggested, all the breaking news, when people come on and say breaking news, some big thing has happened, has had almost no impact on this race. I think if anything has had an impact, as I said earlier, I think that first debate did have impact. But everything else, look, you asked about the town halls earlier. What Donald Trump needed to do in that town hall was relate to the people who were there in a kind of very human way and deal with Savannah Guthrie, the journalist who was asking him questions, deal with her in a respectful way. Instead, he put out a whole set of conspiracy theories. He fought with Savannah Guthrie. He treated her in a way that I think pushes away the suburban women who he needs to get back. So what really happened in the town hall was not that Donald Trump lost votes. I think he's pretty much down where his hardcore vote is. What happened was that he didn't take advantage of the possibility to begin to get back, for example, some of the suburban women who voted for him in 2016.
Yeah, and that's been the story of Trump's campaign from the beginning. He's still running a Republican primary. Our poll, like most polls, has been quite boring this year. This has been the most turbulent.
Oh, you can't say that.
No. Let me explain my argument, Bob. What I mean by that is, of course, there's something in the news every day to drive people crazy about the campaign. But the poll has shown basically a 7 to 9 or 10 point national vote. Remember, there's the Electoral College lead for months. And Trump's situation before COVID was pretty bad. So there's not a lot of turbulence in the polling. That's what I mean about it being a boring race. For all the noise and thunder and everything, the news madness is not boring, but the political reality has been quite boring. There hasn't been a moment where Trump got within the margin of error on Biden, where Biden fell behind in a key state. Right now Biden is winning by not 10 points, but just outside the margin of error, those three great states that elected him. And he's a tiny bit ahead in Florida and North Carolina, a little better in Arizona. So, for those of us who kind of look at the mechanics of the campaign, it is both an incredibly noisy campaign and strategically kind of a boring one.
Yeah, it's a lot like, say, 1956, where Eisenhower led from beginning to end, although he was the incumbent. And in 52, the same thing. In 2000 and 2004, you kept seeing Gore and Bush changing leads. You kept seeing Kerry and Bush changing leads. We don't have that this year.
I think what a lot of people probably are very curious. Of course, we all know that the popular vote itself doesn't win an election. It's the votes in the Electoral College. And what do the battleground states look there? I mean, do you think that's also tracking with the popular vote?
Not
It's
as high.
closer, but it's good. Yeah, we've had 5 occasions in American history where the popular vote has been different from the winner and loser. 2 of them in the last 20 years, and then none in the 20th century. So, by the way, you know who invented the Electoral College? Alexander Hamilton. This is the one song that did not make the musical, by the way. The What the Hell Was I Thinking Cha-Cha-Cha number that Lin Miranda probably had to cut. So it's tighter in those states, but Biden is still in a very enviable position. So as long as nothing changes, and we're running out of days. Remember, with early voting, election day is 10 days long. Then things look very good right now for Joe Biden.
Are you
Hillary
worried about
Clinton.
the polls? Are you worried about people going to the polls? I think they're trying to
Yeah.
make a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, but I think, I am, but I think it could be counterproductive for Trump. And I think a lot of Republican strategists don't understand what he's been doing. Let's say you're kind of a leaning toward Trump voter. You're somewhat older. You live in Wisconsin. You wake up the weekend before, say Sunday or Monday. All the polls are showing Biden's winning Wisconsin by 5 or 6. You might decide that you don't want to go to the polls, especially as COVID cases surge, which is happening. We're heading into another surge of COVID cases. And so I think it can be counterproductive for him. Mike and I have talked about this, but there are 2 big tells on election night that could end this very quickly. One is Florida, one is Ohio, because they both count their absentee ballots as they come in. So by 3 or 4 in the morning, unless it's very, very close, you know who won Florida, you know who won Ohio. And there's no way that Donald Trump can get reelected without winning both of those states.
Yeah, no Republicans ever won without Ohio, and nobody's ever won the presidency without carrying Florida in 96 years. So
No Republican.
No Republicans. So it's interesting because others do, but those 2 political backbreakers both count their absentee ballots as they come in. So we're going to know 95% of the vote by 1 in the morning, probably. Now, on the other hand, Michigan and Wisconsin, 2 of the states that Trump flipped last time, that before that had not voted Republican in a presidential race since the 80s, both do not start counting absentees till election day. The Michigan Secretary of State already said it's going to take at least 5 days to count everything. So there could be more drama there, which raises a troubling prospect of either an upset president or foreign actors, Moscow, Tehran, South Korea, Pyongyang, who want to destabilize our democracy. There will be fertile internet rumors and deep fakes and things about how there's a warehouse in Michigan where they're replacing all of the ballots before they're counted with, it's going to be trouble. So if there's a clear signal out of Florida or Ohio or both, that could snuff all that stuff out, which I think from a systemic point of view would be very, very helpful.
I think when I hear our students talk about it, I'm really proud of them because they are really pushing the vote here. We have this great group, Vote SC, which is a student group organizing. Have you worked with them, or have they?
Oh, yes.
About
we work
involved.
We work very closely with Vote SC. And I'm very proud of the fact that we've steadily moved the percentage of students on campus who are registered to vote up from the low that it was, I think, in 2014. It was about 14%. And I think we now have more than a majority of students on campus registered to vote. And my goal ultimately would be to get everybody to vote. I think young people are going to vote this time. I think we saw the first signs of that in 2018. I think they feel strongly about this election, no matter what side they're on. And I think they're going to go vote. The truth is, as Mike says, that turnout is a bit of a myth in presidential campaigns because people want to vote for president most of the time. But I think that this year we could actually beat the modern record, which was 1960. And you could have turnout as high as 65%.
Wow. Do you see the same, Mike? Is that how you?
I do. I mean, one of the problems with being kind of a voter these days is there's so much process talk on the news media, and you keep hearing the word turnout. It's all about turnout. Well, the truth is, in presidential races, turnout is naturally very high. It's the off-year races where turnout is low, and turnout can make a real difference. So turnout's always a factor. Hillary Clinton had some underperformance in the Midwestern cities that really hurt her in a close election, but turnout is big in presidential races. The question is, will the passion in this campaign and the boatloads of money being poured on it to make it, in theory, easier for people to vote, but you have the COVID wall too. So the campaigns are pushing people to vote who are, not always reliable voters. And the reality of COVID and in some places suppression is pushing back. But I don't think, I'm kind of with Bob. I think you're going to see massive increase in absentee and early voting, which we're already seeing evidence of. But net, I think it's going to be, despite COVID, an above average turnout election. The other thing, by the way, you hear a lot in the media is, we got to motivate the base. That is the biggest lie in politics. The base will vote for a box of hammers if it has an R or a D over it. The key is swing voters. They still exist, and they have all the power. The base, it doesn't matter if a base voter is happy or melancholy when they throw the lever, it still counts. And very few base voters ever stay home. I mean, we have 50 years of presidential polling data to show that they pretty reliably turn out, and they pretty reliably support their party. So keep an eye on those swing voters in those 15, 20 key counties in 5 or 6 states that are going to decide this election.
And I want to add one other thing, because I think it's not just Vote SC. What SC has done and the SC Athletics Department is doing, and what you're doing, opening the Galen Center as a remote voting site so that people can go there and vote safely. And you're going to have members of the football team, the basketball team, all the athletic teams there as poll watchers. And I think it starts October 30th. It's pretty extraordinary. And it's a model, actually, that's being emulated in other places around the country. LeBron James is getting basketball arenas to open up as voting sites. So I think what we want to do, if we can, is make it easier, not harder, for people to vote. And I am proud that SC is doing that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
With you on that. I'm very proud of it too. And I love the fact that our students have been really leading it. That is fabulous. So I've got a couple more things I want to ask you before we stop today, but I'm going to return to our early conversation about the two of you and your relationship. So many people these days, I think, are having this politics are leaking into their personal lives and into their families. Now, it's no secret that for this election, maybe not like most of them, neither of you plans to vote for President Trump. Yet you both, I'm sure, have dear friends who are supporters of President Trump, or you may even have family members. Certainly much of America comes from people who have friends that could vote either way. And yet for many of them, it's just so darn hard. How do you personally navigate those friendships, especially because you're out there so publicly saying these things? How do you do it?
Well, we have a support. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, no, I say, one, again, if you've done politics professionally for a long time, you know not to take it too seriously in your private life. I spend most of my time trying to dodge questions about politics at gas pumps and cocktail parties because, I get enough of it 9 to 5, and I really don't want the Trump guy at the party to try to explain it to me and turn me around. I mean, I get it. I respect their choice, but I never kind of take it personally. I don't judge my friends on their politics. That said, this year has been particularly rough, and I've lost a few friends who are Republicans who think I'm an apostate and a traitor because I've frankly been anti-Trump since 1993 when I dealt with them in New Jersey at Atlantic City when I was working for the governor there as a political advisor. So this one is a little rougher, but like all storms, it'll pass.
We have a major supporter of the center who is voting for Trump, has contributed to Trump, has been repeatedly to the Trump White House. Before COVID hit, she and her husband and Mary Louise and I would go have dinner. We disagreed on a lot of things. Nobody threw over the water. Nobody threw a glass of wine on somebody else. And we had a perfectly civil conversation. And I want at the center students to feel perfectly free to stand up and argue the case for Donald Trump. I wish we were on campus because there would be more of a dynamic that allowed that to happen. But I really want that. I encourage it. I encourage it in the class I teach. And I think we have to do that. And we can do that without saying that, we think there are good people on both sides in Charlottesville. I mean, I don't think the person I was talking about before, who is very much for Donald Trump, would ever say that. She doesn't believe that. So we have to be open to points of view that differ in partisan terms with each other. And I kind of agree with Mike. I once got on a plane and sat down, and the guy sat down next to me and said, "I saw you on MSNBC last night. You were completely wrong, and I want to explain why." And I said, I've got some work to do.
I like this guy.
He said, "I insist on explaining." So I got the flight attendant to change my seat, not because I didn't want to engage with him, but because I didn't want to spend 6 hours going across the country relitigating a 5-minute discussion on a cable network the night before.
Well, just let you in on a little secret. That happens to presidents of universities too. Before we close, I just want to ask you a little bit more about the amazing Center for the Political Future. There's no place like it on the West Coast. But, let's talk to the people about what is it? What are you proud of? Where do you see it going in the next 10 years? And then I want to close by asking you, how can people become engaged with the center? Because I think a lot of people would like to do that.
Well, that is our favorite question. I'll start, and Bob, you can kind of land the plane on it. We do a lot of stuff, as Bob explained. We have a lot of programs, now many on Zoom, where we bring real people from politics to respectfully talk from both sides. We're not looking for bipartisan answers. We're looking at the process of politics, what the incentives are for people to act more civilly and to have more dialogue, and to kind of get kids turned on to the good side of politics, not the pervasive cynicism that, is everywhere in pop culture, where every senator's a crook and every politician's an idiot. That's actually not true. And we like to connect them to reality. We do a lot of internships. We have a tremendous, Art Auerbach is a hero, and we have just a tremendous operation there where we can let kids go out into the real world of politics and learn something. We bring in these great fellows, and we think we provide an enriching experience. So if people want to help, we have something called the Center Leadership Circles, which is how we raise a little bit of money to do a lot of this stuff. I mean, we actually sent, I think 11, maybe it was 9 or 11 kids to the Iowa caucus to work on real campaigns for the summer on the presidential race, which was life-changing for a political kind of nerd who wants to see how it really is out there, going door to door, being yelled at by farmers, and so we try to provide a portal on all dimensions to help people get at the university and beyond, but particularly the students get a taste of real politics and build networks and hopefully get inspired to one day serve either in policy jobs or maybe even as an elected official.
And as Mike often says, I'd like to see the center expand and become the place that examines the impact of technology on politics, because the West Coast is the center of the technological revolution in the world. And that ought to be something that we own. And secondly, California is the great arena of initiative, referendum, and ballot measures. And that's something else that I'd like us to own as we grow and develop. And it started imagining how the center would be at the end of 2016. We've made a lot of progress since then. The Unruh Institute, which deals with the internships and the students, is part of that. But we've expanded in all sorts of other ways. I hope we're having an influence on the wider world. I hope we're having an influence on our students. And I think there are more challenges ahead for us.
I'll tell you, I can give a personal testimony. I met those students that went to the Iowa caucus when they came back. And they were fabulous. And they had learned so much, and they were so steady and insightful. I mean, what an amazing experience. I can't imagine having had something like that at that time in my life. So thank you. You're good for the soul. You're doing amazing things for people everywhere in these conversations. And we're just, it's been so much fun talking to you. Last quick thought. What do you do to degas in this crazy time, and what gives you joy?
My wife gives me joy. And reading books gives me joy, always has. And Going out for a walk gives me joy, although it's not the easiest thing to do because we drove our ballot up the other day to the drop box and about half the people weren't wearing masks.
Oh.
And then you're supposed to cross the street. Well, the street we're driving up was Beverly Glen. You can't just cross the street at random on Beverly Glen. And this has been a testing time where I think you've made some really good calls about how to conduct the university and how to keep it going. And I've discovered the possibilities of teaching iteratively on Zoom. So I throw out a question and I don't wait for some hand to go up, on the screen. Students have learned how to start answering that question and not talk over each other. And that's a pretty big trick with 150 students, but it's worked out.
It's fabulous. Okay, Mike, last word.
Oh, well, after the 2008 election, I jumped on a 100,000-ton container ship in the Seattle harbor and got a cabin and went to Shanghai, China, across the Pacific, saw my first snow volcano, and I wrote a television script that sold. So I work in show business as a screenwriter. I find creative work relaxing. And again, I have a tremendous wife who's very supportive, and our young daughter is never dull and amazing in her own right. So pretty much family, travel, and creative endeavors that are not connected, thank goodness, just to politics.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining me today. I know that people are going to come away from this with insights about the election, the value of civil discourse, the good work you're doing at the center, and friendship between people who have a real passion and dedication to civil discourse. And I want to say to our students, the Galen Center will be open, as you heard. It's ready for you to come vote safely. So we do want you to do that. Get out, exercise your rights and your responsibilities as a citizen, and vote. And I'm giving a special shout out to those Vote SC students who have been working so hard to make voting easy and accessible. And they do want a 100% turnout. So be safe, everyone, and fight on.
Thank you. Fight on.
Thank you.